Something I feel that gets very little recognition in the Halo games is the Insurrection, the ongoing interplanetary civil war between the United Earth government and various rebel groups throughout the colonies. This began when various groups wanted freedom from the oppressive bureaucracy imposed by the Colonial Administration Authority and the UEG, with most wanting complete independence from it. But as tensions continued to rise and acts of diplomacy shifted to acts of terrorism, the conflict officially kicked off in 2494. The resulting battles put many innocent civilians in the crossfire, leading to millions of deaths. Although following the beginning of the Human Covenant War, insurrectionist activity saw a massive decline, as these same rebel groups redirected their resources in order to survive the Covenant. Some groups did remain active though, continuing to undermine the UNSC's efforts until the war's end in 2552. Several insurrectionist groups have now re-emerged, sometimes collaborating with the Covenant remnant factions. Most notably, the New Colonial Alliance, now led by former Spartan 4 Ilsa Zane, have pledged their allegiance to the Banished. Orbital Drop Shock Troopers are the most elite, non-augmented soldiers in the UNSC's arsenal, acting as a rapid response force that is best known for its unique deployment strategy called Transorbital Support Interdiction. This is just a fancy way of saying troopers are dropped from orbit directly onto the planet's surface. This is unique in that not only can they be deployed at a moment's notice, but also behind enemy lines or areas that conventional forces cannot access. ODSTs also specialize in a variety of tasks, such as the elimination of high-value targets, securing points of interest, deep ground surveillance and long-range reconnaissance, counterterrorism operations, or asset recovery, just to name a few. And while it may seem that their role has become outdated in recent decades due to the deployment of several generations of Spartans, the Helljumpers remain a staple of the UNSC's forces, with some of those most accomplished having been recruited into the Spartan 4 program. Examples of this would be Sarah Palmer, the members of Alpha 9, some members of Fireteam Majestic, and so on. Inspired by the paratroopers of old, the Helljumpers have roots dating back as far as the 22nd century, with their first iteration, the Drop Jet Platoon, having been commissioned by the United Nations in 2129. Then, following the formation of the UNSC Marine Corps in 2136, the ODSTs became what we know them as today, making their first extraterrestrial deployment in the Mars campaign against the neo-communist Kozloviks. But when these conflicts ended in 2170 with the Callisto Treaty, the ODSTs were essentially sidelined, as more important issues like overpopulation, famine, and a massive military with no purpose gripped the struggling nations of Earth. The first major redeployment of the ODSTs would not happen again until 2490, during the early days of the insurrection. Using members of the ORION program as their models, this return brought with it an enhanced training regimen and restored reputation. In the years that followed, the Helljumpers would conduct high-risk operations to cut off suppliers and stop insurrectionist activity before it would happen. But their directive would change drastically on November 1st, 2525, when humanity made first contact with the Covenant. Project Orion, also called the Orion Program, was humanity's first attempt at creating augmented supersoldiers, and it was intended to be a more effective way for the United Earth government's military to combat the insurgency growing throughout the colonies. And it's important to note that it had two phases of development. Phase 1 was launched all the way back in 2321, led by the UEG's military, the Colonial Military Authority. This program's biochemical research was rushed into production and only extended to 5 candidates, and because of this, the results were underwhelming and unreliable, which led to the program's termination, with the candidates reintegrated into the military and other key personnel being reassigned to colonization efforts or terraforming projects. But in the years that followed, tensions only continued to rise between the UEG and the colonies, leading to an increase in rebel activities, which eventually escalated into the insurrection. And with the CMA suffering heavy losses from the rebels and slowly being replaced by the UNSC, Phase 2 of Orion was initiated. Phase 2 of Project Orion began in 2491 and had the same mission statement as before, quelling the growing insurrection throughout humanity's colonies. But in this second phase, augmentations for the Orion soldiers were drastically more advanced, including muscular enhancement injections, pulmonary respiratory enhancements, retina inversion injections, and cochlear enhancement tuning. In addition, they would receive neural augmentations that would enhance brain function, granting them enhanced learning capabilities and faster reflexes. And for the 65 candidates chosen, the Orion training regiment was one of the most difficult in history, honing both their physical and mental aptitudes. But once they had completed training and augmentation, they were immediately placed on active duty and saw their first deployment in 2469 in Operation Charlemagne. Ultimately being a success, additional funding was granted and the next group of personnel were approved to begin training. At the height of the program, there were over 300 active duty personnel. While successful in many ways, the scientists behind the program felt that the soldiers weren't quite meeting their expectations, and due to the emerging negative effects the augmentations were having on the aging personnel, the program was officially ended in 2506. And even though Orion would largely be covered up by ONI, we do know that their research helped lay the groundwork for the Spartan 2 program, which is why the candidates are sometimes also referred to as Spartan 1s. In a previous video, I touched on the augmentations used in Phase 2 of the Orion project. These included muscle and neural enhancements, pulmonary respiratory improvements, and so on. But the most notable thing about them is that they came with some nasty side effects. Brought on by either the age of the candidate or the inadequate genetic screening during the selection process, the Orion soldiers suffered irreversible genetic fragmentation and degenerative neurological conditions, sometimes manifesting as either hormone-induced fits of rage or mental instability, and ONI did their best to cover up these side effects, labeling it either as post-traumatic stress disorder or the fictional disease known as Bourne's syndrome. As we know, most were discharged from the military because of this, with some being able to retire and even have families. But that came with its own issues, as their children were required to take a specially crafted blend of injections to ensure normal growth and development. Remarkably though, some Orion soldiers did remain in active service, and in some cases, even longer than most baseline humans, such as was seen with Avery Johnson, who continued to serve for decades after the program's deactivation. While much of Project Orion has been covered up by ONI or lost to history, out of the 165 personnel who were still alive at the time of the program's deactivation, there are a few names who have actually come up in the past. First and foremost, we have Sergeant Avery Johnson, an accomplished member of the program who went on to remain in active duty for over 4 decades. He notably mentored the Spartan 2s and was present during humanity's first contact with the Covenant. We also have some other names, such as Gunnery Sergeant Gladys Wilson, who retired from the Marine Corps following the Eridanos campaign, the married duo of Gilly and James, who were both discharged and went on to have a daughter named Janissary James. But another character who was just featured in the recently released Halo Empty Throne is Octavio Morales. And from what we know, he was discharged following Orion's end, but is still actively serving in ONI under the code name Surgeon. He also went on to get married and even have a child, Kevin Morales. And the reason I mention their children is because they are referred to as Spartan 1.1s, and that is a topic for a whole other video. The Sanshaiyum species is virtually extinct, or at least they're considered to be, because between the fall of High Charity and the campaign of retribution carried out by the Sangheili, it's believed that there are only a few thousand who escaped to the shield world known as Cloister. But even before this, their total population was notably small, with less than 24 million living on High Charity by the year 2552. And while of course High Charity was not their homeworld, it's understood that their long-abandoned homeworld of Genjor Combe has no surviving inhabitants, as their planet was allegedly destroyed by a supernova in 648 BCE. But knowing that the reformist Sanshaiyum who founded the Covenant manipulated the other races with the idea of the Great Journey for thousands of years, this could very well be a lie. And something that's also entirely possible is that there are ancient Sanshaiyum stored in silexes on Forerunner installations, sort of like the ones we saw present on Zeta Halo. But with all of the information we have available at this time, the Sanshaiyum are almost completely gone, being dependent on whatever secrets or technology lies inside Cloister if they are to avoid total extinction. While it has been said that the ancient Sanshaiyum were an attractive race, in modern times we've only seen them portrayed as gangly, fragile, and almost geriatric in appearance. And this is the result of incredibly long lifespans, thousands of years of low gravity, a sedentary lifestyle, inbreeding, and an ever-growing number of sterile individuals. Although many years ago, they attempted to stem this complete genetic bottleneck with the role of celibates, a list of Sanshaiyum who were prohibited from reproducing due to the likely passing of undesirable traits. And once added, it was nearly impossible to be removed from this record unless one became a prelate, individuals who underwent advanced genetic and neural augmentation through the use of Forerunner technology. The effectiveness of the role is up for debate, but it did not discriminate in identifying the individuals who could further damage their species' chances for improvement, censuring even high-status individuals such as the High Prophets, with one example being the Prophet of Truth. But with only a few thousand Sanshaiyum left in existence, they'll need to be more meticulous than ever if they want to avoid the complete extinction of their species. Just like humanity's Spartans, the Sanshaiyum had their own version of augmented super soldiers, which are known as the Prelates. Now in the past, these individuals were specially selected to undergo training within the Sacred Promissory, a munitions factory located in the lower levels of High Charity. Here they would receive advanced genetic, physical, and chemical augmentation through the use of ancient Forerunner technology, enhancing their strength, agility, and control over the release of chemicals within their body. although this came with its limitations, as long-term use and overexertion could result in exhaustion or even death. Prelates were considered formidable opponents to even veteran St. Healy, with some believing that they could even contend with Spartans. And while they largely served as warriors and assassins within the Covenant's military, following the ascension of the Prophet of Truth in 2525, Prelates were deployed to provide oversight and guidance to Jiralhane captain vessels. But following the Battle of Installation 05 in 2552, all but a handful of Prelates were killed, with Dashbasvad being the only known Prelate still alive as of 2560.